My name is Yvonne Calder, and at 69, I thought I had lived long enough to understand what loyalty meant. I worked as a retired textile designer, spending my quiet days stitching small pieces of beauty into the world. Yet nothing prepared me for the moment my son placed a folder on my kitchen table and said the words that cracked something deep inside me. He said, "I need the money tomorrow." His voice was firm, almost practiced, as if this script had been written long before he walked into my home. Then he pushed the file toward me. Inside was a staggering $200,000 debt belonging to his wife. He added, "No delays," while his eyes stayed glued to the glowing screen of his phone. I answered with a single word, "All right." That was the moment I felt something inside me bend and then quietly break. A lifetime of giving, of stepping aside, of believing that motherhood required endless sacrifice, suddenly felt like a story I no longer wished to rehearse. 3 hours later, while he believed I was scrambling to gather the money, I was already boarding a flight out of the state. My hand shook slightly when I fastened the seatbelt, but my chest rose with the first real breath I had taken in years. The next morning, when my son and his wife arrived at my house to collect what they assumed I would obediently provide, they found only a locked door and a single envelope waiting on the kitchen table. When they opened it, a scream tore through the empty house, sharp and echoing across the walls that had once held our family's laughter. Standing thousands of miles away, I felt the weight slide off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I realized I had chosen myself. If this opening pulls you in, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps stories like mine find those who need them most. After the envelope was opened and the scream echoed through my empty house, the story did not begin there. It began at my kitchen table, only a day earlier, when my son pushed a folder toward me with a flat expression that felt colder than the tiled floor beneath my feet. His fingers tapped against the edge of the table in a sharp, rhythmic pulse. He never looked at me long enough to notice the way my breath stalled. He never asked if I had slept well or if my joints still ached in the mornings. He simply nudged the debt closer, as if I were a clerk at a bank rather than the woman who carried him into this world. I watched his tapping hand, the impatience coiled in each movement. I wondered when it began, this distance that turned my child into a stranger. His eyes flicked up for a moment, and there was no warmth in them, no curiosity about my life, no trace of the small boy who once ran barefoot through our backyard. In that moment, an old memory rose inside me like a soft light breaking through a storm. Liam was 6. His hair was still sun-streaked from a summer spent chasing butterflies. He had run into the kitchen holding a small wildflower, its stem bent, its petals already thinning. He placed it in my hand as though it were a treasure. Then he said, with the seriousness only a child can possess, "When you get old, I will take care of you." I remember kneeling down, brushing the soil from his cheek, and thinking there was no promise in the world more fragile or more precious. But promises made by children do not always grow into adulthood. Some wilt long before the years test them. Liam's tapping grew louder. He pushed the folder again, this time with a small sigh as though he was tired of waiting for me to understand what he considered obvious. My mind whispered a line that had been forming in me long before that morning. A child's promise can grow old and die before the person who made it ever realizes it was slipping away. The folder sat between us like a quiet wound. Inside it was a $200,000 debt that did not belong to me, yet it had been placed on my shoulders as if it were my duty to lift it. I felt my heart twist as I watched my son's expression. There was no shame in his voice when he said he needed the money, no apology, only expectation. I wanted to ask him why. Why did he felt entitled to my savings? Why he believed my life existed as a safety net for his mistakes? Why he thought motherhood was a lifetime subscription to unconditional rescue? But the words sat heavy at the back of my throat. Instead, I asked myself a question that shook me more than the demand he made. Was helping him now an act of love or an act of self-harm? If I sacrificed the little I had left, would it bring him stability, Or would it teach him that I was a well he could drain whenever he felt thirsty for an easier life? The room felt smaller as I wrestled with that truth. My hands rested on the folder, though I still had not opened it. I could feel my pulse beneath my fingertips, steady but tired. Liam's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and chuckled softly before slipping it back into his pocket. For a second, I wondered what it must feel like to be so certain that someone else would clean up the wreckage of your choices. He cleared his throat, impatient again. "I need the money tomorrow, Seb," he repeated. Not a request, a directive. Something inside me shifted. Not a flare of anger, not heartbreak. Something quieter, a recognition that the role I had played for decades was no longer mine to inhabit. After he left, the house fell silent. I stood alone in the kitchen, the chair he had occupied still turned slightly away from the table. My legs trembled a little as I walked to the old wooden cabinet where I kept the things my mother left me. Among them was a small notebook with a faded blue cover. I opened it gently, as though my mother were watching. The paper had yellowed with time, but her handwriting remained steady. On one page, written in the careful script I knew so well, were the words, she often whispered when life demanded too much of her. "My daughter, silence is also an answer." I traced the letters with my fingertip, letting them settle into me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the meaning unfold. Silence was not surrender. It was a boundary, and perhaps it was the beginning of choosing myself. Dui day la fin tu, viet dong yêu ko. Ting an, me, ngoi, thu nhật. Lien mut voi phân trug. Dung outline, dung ki tuet. Hom jung jo ba chum. Doi da kim tra ki. Bader nami buntu. Fun high. Whose debt and whose burden? 894 words. The morning after Liam left my house, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the folder still unopened in front of me. The silence pressed against my ribs, as if the room itself were waiting for me to decide what kind of mother I wanted to be for the rest of my life. My fingers hovered over the edge of the file. I had not yet found the courage to look inside, to witness the full weight of what he had asked of me. Before I could steady myself, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Nora stood on the porch with mascara streaked across her cheeks, her shoulders trembling as if she had run through the rain. She was 35, too young to already carry the exhaustion she wore like a second skin. The moment her eyes met mine, she pressed both hands to her face and began to cry harder. She whispered, "I am so sorry, Yvonne. I should have talked to you first. I should have handled this differently." Her voice quivered, but beneath the sorrow I sensed something else, expectation, a quiet confidence that I would reassure her, take her inside, and promise that I would fix everything the way I had quietly fixed small things for them over the years. I stepped aside to let her in. She moved straight to the table where the folder lay and glanced at it with a kind of pleading hope, the hope of someone who believed salvation was already on its way. I noticed the subtle shift in her eyes when she saw it unopened, almost disappointment, as if my hesitation itself were a betrayal. She sat down and reached for my hand. "Liam should not have spoken to you like that. We were stressed. It got out of control." Her grip tightened. It felt less like an apology and more like a reminder that I was part of their solution. My chest tightened with a familiar ache, the ache of someone who had spent years giving quietly and receiving little understanding in return. I studied her face, the soft tremble of her lip, the urgency behind her tears. Yet the longer I looked, the more I realized those tears did not come from fear of losing me, but fear of losing the rescue she assumed I would always provide. A memory flickered. 3 times in the past, she had asked to borrow money. Small amounts at first, $200 for overdue utilities, $500 for a car repair, another sum for an unexpected expense. She explained vaguely, but with great emotional flair. Each time she insisted she hated to ask, but spoke with the ease of someone who believed my help was a natural extension of our relationship. She had never repaid a single dollar. She had thanked me, but her gratitude was weightless, more ritual than recognition. I had never confronted her. Back then, it felt kinder to stay quiet. Nora released my hand and looked directly at me. "You are the only person we can trust. Liam said you would understand. He said you always help." Her words sliced deeper than she intended. My son had spoken of me not as a mother, but as an institution, a backup plan that existed for their convenience. My throat tightened. I finally opened the folder. The papers inside felt cold against my palms. $200,000. My breath hitched and my fingers trembled, the same tremble I had hidden behind my sleeves when life became too heavy. The room tilted slightly, and I placed my other hand on the table to steady myself. A faint chill spread across my chest, as if the numbers alone had stolen the warmth from my body. Nora leaned closer, hoping my silence meant I was calculating a way to save them. But another truth surfaced, one I had never spoken aloud. 2 years earlier, Liam had fallen behind on a different debt. Smaller, but still significant. I had paid it quietly. Not even my closest friend knew. I had hoped it would be the last time I needed to rescue him. I never mentioned it again, and neither did he. He had accepted the help as if it were expected, as if my sacrifice were nothing more than routine maintenance. Nora watched me read through the pages, her breathing quickening with anticipation. "We will make it up to you," she said, but even she did not sound convinced. I closed the folder and folded my hands over it. The air felt heavy with unspoken truths, with years of choices I made out of love, but that had slowly drained the life from my spirit. I looked at Nora and saw her fear, but also her assumption. The quiet belief that I would do what I had always done. Inside me, a question rose like a whisper from an old wound. Was sacrifice still noble when the ones you sacrificed for believed it was simply your duty? The question lingered in the quiet room, and for the first time, I let it breathe. After Nora left, the house settled into a stillness that felt heavier than usual. I had lived here alone for nearly a decade, ever since my husband passed away and the echoes of our life together thinned into quiet corners. The house had once held warmth, laughter, the smell of roasted herbs drifting from the kitchen, the sound of his careful footsteps as he tried not to wake me in the mornings. Now it was a museum of everything I had poured into others, while almost nothing had been poured back into me. I walked through the hallway, my fingers brushing the wooden railing he had polished every spring. The grain felt familiar, like the palm of an old friend. This house had been his pride. After he died, people often asked whether I would move to something smaller, something more manageable. I never could. Leaving it would have felt like leaving the last part of him. Outside my window, I saw Sandra Miles tending to her small garden. She lived alone, too, though she carried her solitude differently. While I tucked mine into quiet drawers, she wore hers like a shawl she refused to apologize for. She stood straighter than most women her age, with silver hair pinned neatly and hands that spoke of decades spent coaxing vegetables from stubborn soil. Sandra noticed everything. She always had. When she saw me watching, she lifted a gloved hand and waved me over. I stepped into the yard, grateful for the air. She studied my face before saying a single word. "Come." We sat on our old patio bench, its paint chipping but still holding strong. She poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. Mine was cracked along the rim, a flaw she had always insisted made it more interesting. "You look tired," she said as she handed it to me. "The kind of tiredness that does not come from sleep." I let out a slow breath. "Liam was here yesterday." She nodded as if she had expected it. "He only comes when he wants something." There was no malice in her voice, only observation. Sandra believed in calling things by their true names, even when others did not. I told her about the debt, about Nora's visit, about the way my hands trembled when I finally opened the folder. She listened without interrupting, only tightening her jaw at the right moments, the way someone does when trying not to shake their head at another human being's blindness. When I finished, she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You are too kind, Yvonne. And sometimes kindness blinds a person worse than cruelty ever could. You keep walking into fires because you think love is supposed to burn." Her words startled me with their accuracy. I looked down at my tea, letting the steam rise against my face. Sandra continued, There is nothing wrong with giving, but giving so much that you disappear is not generosity. It is erased. Her words opened a memory I had tucked away long ago. My husband, leaning against the doorframe one evening after a long shift, watching me scrub the stove after preparing a dinner I barely tasted because I was too busy worrying about the next thing to do. He walked over, took the cloth gently from my hands, and whispered, "You do not have to earn every breath you take." But he was gone, and the world had not spoken to me like that again. Instead, it had asked for more, and I had given more, until more was all I knew how to give. Sandra's gaze softened. "You were a good wife, and you are a good mother. But goodness does not mean surrender. Remember that." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of cut grass across the yard. Sandra's garden rustled like a warning, or perhaps a blessing. I finished my tea, thanked her, and returned to my house. The quiet met me at the door, not hostile, but honest. I set the empty cup down and walked to the bathroom. For reasons I did not fully understand, I turned on the light and faced the mirror. My reflection looked older than I remembered, not because of the lines around my eyes or the silver in my hair, but because of the heaviness I had been carrying for decades without complaint. Yet behind that heaviness, something else flickered, a depth I had not seen before, a steadiness that felt unfamiliar but welcome. I touched the mirror lightly with 2 fingers, as if greeting someone I was meeting for the first time. I did not smile, but my eyes shifted, growing clearer and sharper, as though preparing for a truth that could no longer be ignored. In that quiet reflection, I felt the first hint of something turning inside me. Not anger, not rebellion, something slower and quieter. The beginning of a reversal I did not yet fully understand. And the house, once unbearably cold, suddenly felt like it was holding its breath with me. The hours after my conversation with Sandra unfolded in a strange stillness. I returned to my house and set my keys on the kitchen counter, staring at the folder as if the numbers inside it could reach out and pull me under. Evening crept in slowly. The light dimmed until the corners of the room softened into shadow. I thought I had more time to breathe, more time to understand what kind of life I was stepping toward. But the phone rang, once, then again, then again. When I finally looked at the screen, Liam's name glowed with a cold urgency. I answered. His voice came through sharp and clipped. "Did you transfer it yet? I need it by tonight, not tomorrow, tonight." There was no tremor of apology, no hesitation, no recognition that he was speaking to the woman who once stayed up all night sewing a Halloween costume because he wanted to be the only astronaut with gold trim. He spoke to me the way a man speaks to a system, a mechanism, a source. I held the phone to my ear. I said nothing. My silence stretched long enough for him to become irritated. "Mom, you do not understand how serious this is. Nora is falling apart. I told her you would come through." There it was again. The assumption, the entitlement wrapped in fear, the belief that I was obligated to rescue him from the consequences he never bothered to face. "I will call you back," I said quietly. He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "Do not delay. Please do this today." I ended the call before he could say anything else. My hand did not shake. My breath did not break. Something inside me had already settled into a calm I did not recognize, a calm built from exhaustion and the faint spark of something new. I walked to my bedroom and pulled my small suitcase from the back of the closet. The zipper felt stiff with disuse. I placed it on the bed, opened it, and stared at the empty space waiting to be filled. My heart did not race. My pulse did not skip. There was only the quiet certainty that staying would cost more of me than leaving ever could. I folded clothes with slow, deliberate motions. A soft sweater, a warm shawl, 2 pairs of trousers, a blouse I had not worn in years but always kept because it made me feel like a version of myself I wanted to return to someday. Then I reached for the drawer beside the bed. Inside lay the small blue notebook my mother had given me long before Liam was born. The pages were frayed, the spine weakened by years of turning. It had carried her wisdom into my adulthood, and now it would travel with me into whatever came next. I placed it gently on top of my clothes. The weight of it grounded me. Before closing the suitcase, I sat down at the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as the memories rushed back. Years ago, when my husband controlled every dollar I touched, I created a private account. Not out of rebellion, but out of survival. I had learned then that a woman with no access to her own money has very little access to her own choices. I had forgotten that lesson. Or perhaps I had chosen to forget. Tonight I remembered. I logged into the old account, updated the password, and began transferring every dollar I had. Slowly, the numbers shifted from one screen to another, moving from years of sacrifice into a space that belonged only to me. I waited for the final confirmation. When it appeared, I closed the laptop with a firm, steady motion. The house hummed with quiet. I zipped the suitcase. The sound cut through the room like a line being drawn. I slipped on my low black shoes, the pair I always reserve for traveling. I walked to the front door, touched the handle, and closed it behind me. The click of the lock echoed deeper than I expected. A small, definitive sound that felt like the closing of a chapter no one else had bothered to read. The night air met me with a chill that brushed across my face and arms. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and stepped toward the waiting taxi. The streetlights glowed softly, casting long shadows across the pavement. As the car pulled away, I looked back only once. The house stood still, dignified, no longer a place that demanded my silence, but a witness to the moment I reclaimed my own. When I reached the airport, the automatic doors opened and a rush of cold air swept across my skin. Instead of shivering, I inhaled. The cold felt clean, honest, alive. For the first time in years, my lungs filled without effort. My chest lifted without heaviness. I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Lightness, the kind that comes when a woman chooses herself. By the time my plane lifted into the dark sky, the house I had lived in for decades was already slipping into a silence that would soon be broken by the arrival of the two people who believed they owned a piece of me. I imagined the streets still and dim, the porch light glowing faintly, unaware that the woman who once tended its bulbs had already vanished into the night. While I moved farther from the life that had drained me, Liam and Nora were speeding toward my empty home, fueled by certainty that I would never refuse them. That certainty had been stitched into them by years of habit, years of me smoothing over their mistakes with my savings, my time, and my diminishing strength. Later, I learned from a neighbor what happened when they arrived. First came the pounding on the door, a hard, rhythmic force, not angry but desperate. The kind of knocking that announces itself as rightful, not intrusive. Liam called my name through the wood, his voice tight with urgency. Nora's breath trembled behind him. When no answer came, the knocking turned to metallic scraping. The neighbor described the sound as sharp and impatient, like a tool dragged along the lock. The metal clicked, then slipped. Their breathing quickened, marked with panic rather than fear for me. Panic about what they believed they were owed. The door gave in with a jolt. Not a crash, not violence. Just the dull surrender of old hinges pushed past their limit. Inside, the air was still. The lights were off. The kitchen waited in silence. Their footsteps moved across the tile, quick and purposeful. The refrigerator hummed lightly in the silence. A drawer slid open. A cabinet door tapped shut. Objects shifted as they searched for signs of money or instructions or some reassurance that I intended to save them as expected. Then they saw it, the envelope. It lay in the center of the kitchen table, placed carefully where the afternoon light used to fall when I drank my tea. My handwriting marked the front with their names, written in the steady script I used for grocery lists and birthday cards, and all the small notices of care that were rarely acknowledged. Liam grabbed it first. His breath was shallow, almost ragged. Nora hovered behind him. Her hands twisted together. He tore the envelope open. Something inside slid out and hit the table with a soft tap. A photograph. It was an old family picture taken in a park one autumn. The leaves behind us were gold and orange. I stood with one hand on Liam's shoulder. My husband held the camera timer in his hand, laughing because the machine had nearly toppled over from the uneven ground. But the photograph on the table no longer showed all of that. It had been cut cleanly down the middle. Precisely, not angrily. One half remained in the envelope. The half with Liam and Nora. The half with me was missing. Before they could question it, before they could explain it away as anger or cruelty, a small piece of paper fluttered out beside the photograph. My handwriting again, only one sentence. I no longer have the strength to live as a walking wallet. According to the neighbor who overheard the moment, there was a pause. A long, suspended silence as the meaning settled in the room. Then came the scream. It rang through the house with a sharpness that sliced the quiet. Not grief, not fear. Something closer to disbelief, shock at the realization that the foundation they stood on, the foundation made of my effort and sacrifice, had finally crumbled beneath them. The sound carried through the open door and into the street, where the night absorbed it without echo. They never knew the truth of the photograph. They never knew that I kept the other half with me, tucked safely into the pocket of my suitcase. I had slipped it between two folded blouses before leaving, placing it beside my mother's notebook. I did not cut it to punish them. I cut it to mark a boundary, to acknowledge that the part of me that once belonged entirely to my family no longer fit inside the life they demanded from me. Some might say the gesture was harsh. Some would argue it crossed a line. But others understand that symbolism is sometimes the only language left to a woman who has spent her life speaking softly while everyone else spoke over her. Whether the act was cruel or brave would become the first point of debate among those who later heard my story. But for me, at that moment, it was simply necessary. Necessary to step out of the frame they kept me trapped in. Necessary to reclaim the space where my life might grow again. Florida greeted me with the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones slowly, asking nothing in return. When I stepped out of the airport, the humid night air pressed gently against my skin, reminding me that I was far from the cold kitchen where my life had quietly collapsed. A taxi carried me toward a small coastal town I had chosen almost at random, guided only by the vague memory of a postcard I once admired for its turquoise shoreline. The apartment I rented was modest, tucked above a small bakery that opened before sunrise. The walls were thin and the furniture mismatched, but the moment I opened the window and heard the ocean breathing in long, rhythmic waves, I felt something loosen inside me. The sea did not know my name. It did not care about my past or what I had abandoned. It only offered a steady sound, rising and falling, patient and unhurried, as if it had been waiting for a woman like me to finally sit still. On my second morning there, I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned, startled. Helena Rhodes stood at the end of the walkway, her white hair swept back, her posture as straight as it had been 30 years ago in our university days. Helena had become an attorney, one of the best in her field before she retired. She had always carried herself with a kind of grounded intelligence, the kind that made people listen whether they agreed with her or not. She opened her arms and I stepped into them without hesitation. Her embrace was firm, steadying, as though she understood that the woman standing before her was held together by threads thinner than I wished to admit. "I saw your name on the tenant." "Board downstairs," she said. I could not believe it at first. I laughed softly, shaken by the simplicity of the coincidence. I did not plan anything, I just came. Helena studied me for a long moment. "You are safe now. That is enough for today." We sat on the balcony overlooking the quiet street. The morning sun reflected off the nearby water, creating soft patterns on the wall. It felt unreal to be sitting there with someone who had known me long before life taught me to silence myself. She waited until I finished my cup of tea before saying, "Tell me why you left." I told her everything, not in dramatic detail, not with bitterness, but with the calm that comes after a wound has stopped bleeding and only the bruise remains. I told her about the debt, about Nora's expectation, about Liam's demand, about the quiet that finally pushed me toward a truth I had ignored for years. Helena listened without interruption. She always had a gift for that, the ability to let silence shape the meaning rather than cut it short. When I finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "What you did was not running," she said. Her voice was low, steady, the same tone she used in court when delivering a sentence of clarity. "It was returning to yourself." Something inside me tightened, then softened. I felt my breath shift. Tears gathered behind my eyes, but they did not fall. It was not sadness. It was recognition. Life in Florida began gently. I developed a routine of walking along the shore each morning, letting the sand cool my feet. The apartment's thin curtains fluttered with the ocean breeze. The bakery downstairs filled the hallway with the smell of warm bread. Slowly, I began sewing again. Small embroidered pieces at first, flowers, birds, patterns that reminded me of the life I once imagined for myself before responsibility swallowed me whole. Helena encouraged me to visit the local weekend market. "Your hands have not forgotten how to create," she said. "People will want what you make, not out of pity, but because it carries your spirit." So I rented a small table at the market. The first time someone bought one of my pieces, a woman visiting from Georgia, I felt a spark of something I had not felt in years. Pride, not tied to motherhood or sacrifice. Pride born from my own effort. The days passed with a rhythm the sea seemed to approve of. Each evening, I wrote a small note in my mother's notebook, not long entries, just thoughts, reminders, echoes of lessons I was finally willing to learn. One afternoon, while packing my embroidered pieces for the market, I opened the notebook to a familiar page. There, in my mother's delicate script, was the sentence that had followed me from my old life into this new one. Silence is also an answer. Reading it again, in this quiet apartment by the sea, I understood its meaning more clearly than ever. Silence was not defeated. It was a decision, a boundary, a form of healing I had denied myself for far too long. The waves crashed in the distance, steady and sure. For the first time, I felt in harmony with them. Life in Florida settled into a rhythm that felt almost borrowed, as if I were trying on a version of myself I had not worn in decades. The sea continued its steady breathing outside my window. The bakery below woke me each morning with the smell of warm dough and cinnamon. I stitched during the late afternoons, letting colored threads pull my mind into quiet places. But peace has a way of drawing the past toward it, the way waves pull back what the shore tries to let go. The first call came on a Thursday, then another, and another. I silenced the phone. An hour later, 10 more calls. By evening, the number had grown into dozens. Liam's name flashed across the screen again and again, a relentless arrival of something I was no longer willing to hold. Each vibration rattled the small nightstand beside my bed, a physical reminder of the life I had stepped away from. I set the phone face down and returned to my sewing. My fingers moved carefully, but my chest tightened with each unanswered ring. The next morning, I found more missed calls, more messages, more attempts to reach a version of me that no longer existed. I sat at the small kitchen table, the ocean breeze drifting in through the open window. The phone buzzed again, and for a moment I reached for it, instinct pulling me toward familiar patterns. But I stopped. My hand hovered in the air, suspended between old loyalty and new boundaries. I let it ring. That afternoon, while preparing items for the weekend market, I noticed a new voicemail icon. I hesitated, then pressed play. Nora's voice came through, strained and trembling. "You are his mother. How could you leave us like this? We are falling apart. You were always the one person we could count on. Please call back. Please do not abandon us." Her words struck me with unexpected force. Not because she was hurting, but because she still spoke from the assumption that I owed them my endurance. She framed it as love, as duty, as maternal identity. But beneath the surface lay the same belief that had led them to my doorstep with a debt that was never mine. For the first time since arriving in Florida, tears fell freely down my cheeks. Not loud or dramatic tears, quiet ones, the kind that sneaks out when the heart finally admits that it has been bruised for far too long. I cried for the years I spent believing that love meant limitless giving. I cried for the younger version of myself who did not know she was allowed to stop. But even as the tears came, I did not reach for the phone. I did not dial back. I wiped my face, folded a piece of linen, and breathed in the warm scent of thread and cotton. My heart ached, but the ache no longer dictated my choices. On Saturday, I set up my small corner booth at the market. The wooden tables were filled with handmade crafts, local honey, seashell jewelry, and bright citrus produce. My embroidered pieces lay neatly arranged, each one holding hours of careful work and concentration. Mid-morning, a young woman approached my booth. She wore a simple sundress and held the hand of a little boy who carried a toy truck. She picked up one of my embroidered handkerchiefs, tracing the stitches with gentle fingers. "This is beautiful," she said. "Did you make it yourself?" I nodded. Every thread. She smiled with genuine warmth. "My grandmother used to sew like this. She always said that women who stitch patience into fabric are the kind of women who hold families together. Your children must be lucky to have someone like you." The words hit me like a soft blow. Kind, innocent, unaware, yet painfully precise. I felt my heart clench, not with bitterness, but with the weight of everything that had unraveled before I found this quiet place. I held her gaze and offered a small smile, though it trembled at the edges. The young woman continued, "My husband says people are blessed when they have a mother who loves them enough to show up. You must have done that your whole life." The boy tugged her sleeve, eager to move on. She thanked me again, purchased the handkerchief, and walked away with a cheerful wave. I watched them leave, the little boy swinging his toy truck, the woman humming lightly as the wind lifted her hair. Something inside me tightened, then loosened. Her words echoed in the space between who I had been and who I was becoming. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "They were lucky once. They just never noticed." My heart stung, but I did not crumble. I stood behind my table, letting the ocean breeze cool my face. I lifted my chin and breathed in the salty air. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. I did not reach for it, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of something deeper, self-preservation. A lesson learned too late, but learned nonetheless. The market ended late that Sunday, and I returned to my apartment with the soft exhaustion that comes from honest work. My hands smelled faintly of linen and citrus soap. The ocean murmured outside the window, its rhythm steady and familiar. I placed my unsold pieces in a small wooden box and sat down to rest, feeling the kind of quiet that settles into a home when the day has treated you gently. That calm lasted only a few minutes. A knock echoed against my door, firm, purposeful, not the hesitant tap of a neighbor nor the rushed rhythm of a delivery driver. I stood still for a moment, the air tightening around me. When I opened the door, a woman in a dark blazer stood in the hallway. She held a badge in one hand and introduced herself with a clear, steady voice. "I am Detective Erin Cole. May I speak with you for a moment?" Her presence shifted something in the air. It was not threatening, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that enters a room only, when truth insists on being heard. I stepped aside and invited her in. She looked around the small apartment with a quick, assessing gaze, as though noting the quiet life I had built since arriving. Then she met my eyes. "Ms. Calder, I am here because your name appeared repeatedly in a financial investigation involving your son." My breath stilled. A coldness pressed gently against my ribs. "My son," I repeated, as if clarifying it would soften the impact. Erin nodded. "We have reason to believe he has been involved in unauthorized transactions, loan fraud, and the use of personal information belonging to others. Your name is listed as a guarantor on several documents." I blinked, trying to steady the room as it tilted slightly. The words felt foreign, too heavy to absorb all at once. "I never signed anything." "That is why I am here," she said. "We need to confirm what you did and did not authorize." I had spent years telling myself that Liam was simply careless with money, reckless, entitled, but never dangerous, never criminal. I believed his faults were shaped by dependency, not deception. The truth now stood in front of me, wearing a badge and speaking calmly, and I felt the floor beneath my feet shift. Aaron continued, "We suspect he used your information to secure multiple lines of credit. We will need a formal statement from you." I walked to the small kitchen table and sat down slowly. The chair creaked under my weight. She placed a folder in front of me, filled with printed documents. My name appeared again and again, typed neatly beside numbers I had never seen and signatures that were not mine. My heart pressed painfully against my chest. I traced one of the forged signatures with my fingertip. It looked nothing like my handwriting, yet there it was, legally binding on paper. For a moment, I could not speak. The shock did not come with heat or anger. It came with a cold ache that spread through my body, settling into my bones. How long had he been doing this? How many times had he reached for me in ways I never knew, pulling from me even when I was not present to refuse? Aaron sat quietly, allowing the silence to hold the truth gently, not forcefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "We know this is difficult, but your cooperation will help us understand the full scope of what happened." She slid a statement form toward me. My hand hovered above the pen. My fingers trembled lightly, a small involuntary flutter. I had felt this tremble before, years ago, in moments of fear and exhaustion, but this time something else accompanied it. Resolve. I took a breath and picked up the pen. The ink flowed smoothly as I wrote my name, my address, and the simple declaration, "I did not authorize these actions." My signature wavered slightly at the end, but my eyes remained steady. Aaron nodded, reading the form carefully. "Thank you. This will help move the case forward." I looked out. The window where the ocean stretched into the horizon, a deep blue line separating the life I had left from the one I was trying to build. For years, I had covered for Liam. I had softened consequences, absorbed his mistakes, and convinced myself I was protecting him from a world that would judge him too harshly. But I was not protecting him. I was enabling him. As the truth settled into me, I felt the strange mixture of grief and clarity that comes when a mother finally understands that love cannot save someone who refuses to save himself. I turned back to Aaron. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "For the first time," I said, "I am not shielding him." Aaron closed her folder and gave a small nod of respect. Outside, the waves continued their steady rhythm, as if acknowledging the shift inside me. A tide had turned, and there was no going back. Detective Aaron returned 2 days later. I recognized the sound of her knock, steady and professional, not questioning whether she had the right to be there. When I opened the door, she removed her sunglasses and spoke with the kind of measured calm that people use when delivering news they know will land heavily. "Ms. Calder, your son has been taken into custody for preliminary investigation." The words sank into me slowly. The ocean behind her continued its rhythmic breathing, indifferent to the shift inside my chest. I stood still, gripping the edge of the doorframe as Aaron explained the charges, the forged signatures, the financial trails that led straight back to him. She paused, giving me room to respond, but I had no breath to offer. I nodded once, emotion small enough to hide the tremor in my hands. "We will update you as the investigation continues," she said. "I thought you deserved to know directly." After she left, I closed the door and sat at the kitchen table. The chair, the window, the curtain brushing the sill with the breeze, everything remained unchanged. Yet I felt as if the world had shifted an inch to the left, leaving me slightly unbalanced. I had imagined many outcomes when I walked away from my old life, but not this, not my son in handcuffs. A mother's mind tries to protect her from the harshest truths. Mine had been doing that for years. By late afternoon, I walked to the shoreline and let the waves roll across my feet. The air tasted of salt and wind. I breathed it in, trying to steady the sharp ache inside my ribs. I knew the past would find me eventually. I had not expected it to arrive the next morning. At sunrise, someone knocked on my door again. This time the knock was uneven, frantic. When I opened it, Nora stood there, her face pale, eyes swollen from tears. Her clothes were wrinkled, and her hair clung to her temples. She looked nothing like the composed woman who once carried entitlement like a shadow. "Yvonne," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please." I did not know where else to go. I stepped aside, and she walked in with the unsteady movements of someone whose world had collapsed overnight. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to contain her sobs, but the effort failed. "I flew here last night," she said. "They took him in front of me. I begged them to explain, but all they said was that he used your name, your information, your credit. They said you confirmed it." Her eyes widened, searching mine for denial, for comfort, for any sign that I might step back into the role she believed belonged to me. I remained quiet. Nora sank into the chair across from me. Her shoulders shook as she cried, not theatrically, but with the raw grief of someone finally forced to confront the truth. After a long silence, she whispered, "He always told me you would save him. Every time we were in trouble, he said, 'My mother is kind. She will never abandon me. She will bail us out. She always does.'" She swallowed hard, her tears dropping onto her hands. "I did not realize how deeply he depended on you. Not love, dependence, expectation, like you were a safety net that would never break." Her confession tensed something in my chest. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way I had avoided acknowledging. Nora looked up with a gaze filled not with manipulation this time, but with a pain that seemed to reach through the room. "He believed you would give him anything, even if it destroyed you." My silence grew heavier. It pressed into every corner of the apartment. For years, silence had been my surrender. Now it was my truth. Nora wiped her eyes. She hesitated before asking the question that carried the weight of everything she feared. "Will you save him again?" Her voice shook. Her breath caught. The room felt impossibly still, as if the sea itself had paused outside the window. I looked at her for a long time, letting the years of sacrifice settle into the space between us. I thought of the nights I stayed awake helping Liam pay his bills, the debts I quietly erased, the forgiveness I offered long after my strength was gone. I thought of the woman I had been, and the woman I was becoming. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. It carried no anger, no regret, only clarity. "This time," I said, "I am saving myself." The words left my mouth like a door closing softly, firmly, a boundary drawn not out of cruelty, but out of long overdue truth. Nora covered her face again and sobbed. I stayed with her, not as a rescuer, not as a sacrifice, but as a woman who had finally learned the price of losing herself. Outside, the waves continued their steady rhythm, as if granting me permission to let go. The courthouse rose from the ground like a solemn monument, its stone steps worn by decades of people seeking justice, forgiveness, or something in between. As I walked toward the entrance, the air felt strangely heavy, as though every choice I had ever made as a mother followed me up each step. Detective Erin met me inside. She guided me through the security line, her tone steady and respectful. "You will be called as a witness. Just speak the truth as you understand it," she said. The truth. I had spent my whole life softening it for my son. Today, I could no longer do that. The courtroom was cool and brightly lit. Rows of benches formed a narrow corridor leading to the judge's desk. Lawyers shuffled papers. A clerk typed quickly at a small computer. The air buzzed with a quiet, tense energy. Then the door to my left opened. Liam entered. His wrists were not cuffed, but two officers walked just behind him. His shoulders slumped, and the confidence he once carried so easily seemed to collapse under the weight of everything he had run from. Our eyes met. For a brief second, I saw the small boy who once slipped wildflowers into my palm, but the moment passed. Fear flickered in his expression, the anger, then something far more difficult to witness, confusion, as if he could not understand how the person who had always rescued him now sat on the opposite side of the room. He took his seat. I remained still, my hands clasped in my lap. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The proceedings began with formalities, then testimonies from financial experts explaining the documents forged in my name. My name echoed through the courtroom, attached to evidence that did not belong to me. Finally, the clerk called, "Ms. Yvonne Calder." The sound of my name vibrated through me. I stood and walked to the witness stand. Aaron watched me with quiet encouragement. I raised my hand, took the oath, and sat down. The prosecuting attorney approached. "Ms. Calder, can you confirm whether you authorized the financial transactions in question?" "I did not," I answered. My voice was calm, though my throat tightened around the words. The attorney nodded. "Were you aware that your name and information were used to obtain multiple lines of credit?" "No," I said. "I learned of it only when investigators contacted me." Then came the question I had been bracing for. "How would you describe your relationship with your son?" A hush fell over the courtroom. I folded my hands tighter, willing them not to tremble. "I love him," I said. "I always have. But love does not mean enabling harm. For years, I believed helping him would teach him responsibility. Instead, it taught him that I would cushion every fall, that I would surrender whatever was left of myself to protect him from the consequences of his choices." A murmur ran through the room. I saw Liam lower his gaze, jaw clenched. The attorney thanked me and stepped back. The judge gestured toward the defense. Liam stood. His attorney nodded, allowing him to speak for himself. He approached the stand slowly, uncertainty bending his posture. When he spoke, his voice cracked slightly. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "You're my mother. You're supposed to stand by me. You owe me that." The word "owe" cut through me with unexpected sharpness. "Oh," I repeated softly. He took a breath, building strength behind his frustration. "You owe me love. You owe me support. You owe me forgiveness. A mother owes her child." The judge reprimanded him for emotional questioning, but allowed me to respond. I looked directly at him, no longer through the lens of guilt or fear, but through the clarity I had gained by leaving. "You say I owe you love," I said, my voice steady. "But love is not a debt, and I have given you love every day of your life, more than you ever recognized, more than I allowed myself to keep." His eyes widened. "But that is not enough," he whispered. I shook my head gently. "No, Liam. What you want is not love. What you want is sacrifice without end. You want a version of me that no longer exists." He clenched his fists. "You're supposed to help me." I felt my breath steady. My heart stopped trembling. "No, son," I said. "I have already paid with my life. Every choice, every forgiveness, every burden I carried in silence. I have paid more than any mother should. I owe you nothing now." The courtroom fell silent. For a moment, even the judge seemed frozen. Liam stepped back, shock spreading across his face. He whispered, "Mom, please, I am scared." The ache in my chest deepened, but I did not waver. I had spent a lifetime softening the world for him. It was time to let the truth stand without padding. The judge delivered the ruling. Liam was to be held accountable, though the sentence allowed for rehabilitation and financial restitution programs. It was not harsh, but it was firm. The gavel struck once, a sound that sealed years of unspoken truths. As Liam was escorted out of the room, he looked back at me with eyes I struggled to recognize, not angry now, not entitled, just lost. And for the first time in my life, I understood that saving him was never my duty. Saving myself was. After the court hearing, the days that followed unfolded with a silence that felt neither heavy nor hollow. It was a silence that allowed room for breath, for reflection, for pieces of myself to return one by one. I walked along the shoreline each morning, letting the water sweep over my feet, the foam curling around my ankles like a gentle greeting. The sea no longer felt like a witness to my escape. It felt like a companion to my healing. It was during one of those walks that an idea took hold. It arrived softly, like a tide rolling in. I had spent decades learning the painful reality that financial dependence can trap a woman, mute her choices, and swallow her sense of self. I had lived that truth beside my husband and again beside my son. I knew what it meant to stay silent because your survival depended on it. What if other women like me could find their voices again? What if they could begin not with fear, but with support? With every step in the sand, the idea grew. Roots, by the time I returned to my apartment, it had taken shape. I would build a small program for older women seeking financial independence, a space where they could learn, share, rebuild, and bloom again. I named it Second Bloom. The title felt right, not a beginning, not an ending, a blooming that belongs to anyone who has lived long enough to know pain and still chooses hope. When I told Helena about the idea, she smiled with that quiet pride she reserved for moments when she saw someone stepping into their truth. "You are not just rebuilding your life," she said. "You are planting a garden for others." She helped me navigate the legal steps with her usual clarity. Within weeks, Second Bloom had a registered name, a small rented space at a community center, and a list of women who had heard whispers about it and wanted to attend. The night before our first workshop, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a bouquet of white lilies with a handwritten note. "Proud of you, bloom well." It was from Sandra, sent from her home in another state. I held the flowers to my chest for a long moment, letting the gentle fragrance stir memories of her garden and her unwavering honesty. On the morning of the workshop, I arrived early to arrange chairs in a circle, lay out notebooks, and set a small vase of Sandra's lilies on the table. The scent filled the room with a soft brightness. I stood in the center of the space, feeling my heart beat with a mixture of anticipation and humility. One by one, women entered. Some carried worry in their eyes, others carried years of exhaustion, others carried the careful hope of someone stepping into unfamiliar ground. I welcomed each of them, offering tea and a seat. When everyone settled, I introduced myself. "My name is Yvonne Calder. I am 70 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am choosing to begin again." A few women nodded, their faces softening. We started with simple exercises, sharing stories, writing down fears, naming long-hidden strengths. The room shifted slowly, warming with each voice that broke the silence. During a break, a woman approached me. She was small in stature, with kind eyes and a faint tremble in her hands. She looked as though life had pressed on her shoulders for far too long. She reached for my hand and held it with surprising firmness. "I am 65, she said. "For years I believed it was too late for me, too late to change, too late to start, too late to reclaim anything I lost." Her voice quivered. "But then I heard you speak, and I realized something. Maybe I still have time." She looked at me with a vulnerability that pierced straight through my heart. "So, tell me," she whispered, "is it really not too late to begin again?" I tightened my hands around hers. "No," I said with certainty, "it is never too late." Her eyes filled, not with sorrow, but with recognition. A seed planted, a truth reclaimed. She nodded slowly and returned to her seat with a steadier step. As the workshop continued, laughter began to surface. Soft at first, then open, then shared across the room. Women who arrived carrying fear now leaned toward one another with a sense of kinship. Something was blooming, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, beautifully. When the session ended, I locked the door and stood alone in the empty room. Sunlight streamed across the chairs, casting long, gentle lines across the floor. My hands rested at my sides, warm and steady. For the first time in years, I felt myself expanding rather than shrinking. Life had found a way to bloom again within me, and I was finally ready to bloom with it. 1 year after the first meeting of Second Bloom, the community center felt like a second home. The walls, once bare and echoing, now held soft bulletin boards filled with handwritten messages from women who had found strength again. Their words shimmered with quiet triumph. I often arrived early, unlocking the door while the morning light filtered through the tall windows and painted the room gold. On the anniversary of our founding, we organized a public talk. Nothing grand, just shared stories, reflections, and gentle encouragement for anyone who needed it. Rows of chairs stretched across the room. A few vases of flowers lined the front table. The scent of lilies and coastal air mixed together in a comforting hush. Women filtered in slowly, greeting one another with hugs and smiles, many of them carrying the confidence they once feared they could never reclaim. I welcomed each person, my heart warm with gratitude for the life that had unfolded from a single choice to leave and begin again. As the room settled, I stepped to the front and began speaking. I talked about resilience, about financial independence, about the courage it takes for a woman to reclaim her voice after decades of being silenced by circumstance or expectation. I spoke of my mother's wisdom, of the small steps that had led us all to bloom again. Then, near the edge of my peripheral vision, someone moved. A figure stood quietly at the back of the room, still, unobtrusive. My breath caught. I knew that shape. I knew the slope of those shoulders. I knew the hesitant way he shifted his weight, as if unsure he deserved to remain where he stood. Liam. For a moment, the room fell away. My voice continued, but my mind drifted toward the shadow at the rear. He did not sit. He did not draw attention. He simply watched, his hands clasped in front of him, posture smaller than I had ever seen. When the talk ended, women approached me with gratitude, offering embraces and stories. I answered each one patiently, though my eyes kept drifting toward the back. He waited until the room emptied, until no one remained except the two of us. I felt my pulse thrum gently beneath my skin. I did not move toward him. I simply stood at the front table, arranging papers that did not need arranging. Finally, he stepped forward. Slow, measured, almost reverent. When he reached me, he stopped at a respectful distance. His face carried the faint shadows of a difficult year, but his eyes were clear, not frantic, not demanding. Something different lives there now, something humbled, something softened. "Mom," he said quietly, "I was not sure if I should come." I folded my hands, grounding myself. "You came anyway." He nodded. "I needed to." He looked around the room, taking in the chairs, the lilies, the sunlight warming the floor. His jaw tightened with emotion he did not try to hide. "I heard about what you are doing here," he said. "Women starting over, women getting their lives back. I never understood you before, not really. I only understood what you gave me, not who you were when you were giving it." His voice cracked slightly. "When you left, I thought you were abandoning me. I was angry for a long time, but after the arrest, after the programs they put me through, I finally stopped running from myself. I finally faced the truth about the choices I made, and I realized something." He lifted his gaze to mine, not pleading, not defensive. "A part of me believed you would never leave, that you would always come to save me. I depended on that. I hid behind it, and when you walked away, it forced me to stop, to see myself clearly, to change." A long pause gently unfolded between us. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. "I understand now. You did not leave to hurt me. You left to save yourself. And because you did, I finally stopped before I lost everything. So I came to say thank you." The room felt impossibly quiet. My heart carried the weight of every year we had lost, every moment spent in fear and confusion. Yet beneath that weight, something light began to rise. I did not reach for him. I did not collapse into tears. Instead, I placed one hand over my chest, right above the steady beat of my heart. "I wish you peace," I said. He closed his eyes briefly, as if the words landed inside him with unexpected gentleness. When he opened them again, they were calmer. "Goodbye, Mom," he whispered. He turned and walked toward the door. His steps were sure, not frantic, not broken. The power dynamic between us had shifted, not with force, but with understanding. For the first time, I was no longer the anchor holding him in place, and he was no longer the storm pulling me under. A quiet reversal, a necessary one. I turned 70 on a calm morning in late spring. The air carried the scent of salt and warm sand, and a shy breeze drifted through my small apartment overlooking the sea. The waves rolled in with steady patience, their rhythm as familiar to me now as my own pulse. Life had slowed into something soft, something honest, something I had not known how to choose when I was younger. My apartment was modest, but every corner told a story of healing. A small wooden table, Beside the window held my embroidery threads, neatly arranged in jars that glittered faintly in the afternoon light. My mother's blue notebook rested open beside them. The pages had grown even more delicate with time, their edges feathered from years of being turned and held and cherished. I touched the notebook gently, running my thumb across the familiar curve of her handwriting. I could almost hear her voice again, quiet yet steady, guiding me through every chapter of my life. On the page before me, where she had written years ago, the words felt as true now as they had the day I first rediscovered them. Silence is also an answer. The sentence rested in the center of the page like an anchor, not heavy, but grounding. It had followed me through loss, through escape, through rebuilding, through the tenderness of beginning again. Now it lived not only in the notebook, but in me. Near the edge of my desk sat a small wooden drawer. Inside it, wrapped in a soft cloth, was half of the family photograph I had kept when I left my old life. The image had faded slightly, touched by time, but my face remained clear. I looked younger in it, hopeful in a way that almost hurt to remember. I had not thrown the photograph away. I had not cut it again. I had simply kept it at a distance, a boundary, not a rejection. A reminder that love can exist without sacrifice, swallowing the one who gives it. I opened the drawer and gazed at the photo for a moment, not with grief, not with longing, with understanding. The woman in the picture had done the best she could with what she knew, and the woman looking at it now had learned how to live differently. The afternoon sun spread across the room, warming the wooden floor. I sat in my chair, stitching slow patterns into a linen cloth, letting the quiet settle around me. Each stitch moved with intention, a small tribute to the life I had reclaimed. Sometimes I still think of Liam, not with bitterness, but with a soft kind of acceptance. Our last meeting a year ago had shifted something deep inside both of us. I wished him peace that day, and I meant it. Peace for him to grow, peace for me to let go. As the final rays of sun glimmered on the ocean, I set my embroidery aside and turned toward the window. The horizon glowed with a gentle gold. It struck me how life, even after great cracks and collapses, finds ways to open again, sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but always with possibility. I inhaled deeply, feeling the fullness of the moment. Then I spoke aloud as if the room itself were listening. "If you have ever been treated as a burden," I said softly, "remember this. You are the person who held a family together when no one else noticed the weight on your shoulders. You are the steady hands that cooked, cleaned, comforted, forgave, and gave again. You carried more than anyone ever thanked you for, and you deserve to live the rest of your life for yourself." The room stayed still, holding the words with gentle reverence. I placed my palm over my heart, feeling the quiet beat beneath my ribs. It no longer raced with anxiety or fear. It no longer tightened under unspoken expectations. It simply beat, steady and free. I closed the drawer containing the half photograph, not to hide it, but to honor the space I had created for myself. Boundaries were no longer walls. They were doors. Doors that opened to a life I had chosen at last. As the evening breeze swept through the apartment, I whispered a final offering, this time not just to myself, but to anyone who might one day hear my story. If you have ever walked away in silence to save yourself, share your journey. Somewhere out there, someone is searching for a light to guide them out of the dark. The waves continued their steady rhythm outside my window, and I let the silence answer for me.